Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you happen to be listening from today. Happy Friday. We made it. That means it's also another Friday for She Rocks. I'm excited to be here with you all. Wherever you happen to be tuning in from, please let me know. Don't be shy. Let us know. We are streaming live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. She Rocks is a weekly interview series where I get to meet and share with all of you women who rock. I get to do this because it's part of my job as the partner and CEO of Together Digital, an amazing organization of 1,000 women across the country who work in digital adjacent fields. We come together, we work together, we collaborate, we ask, we give, and we all succeed. If this sounds like something that you're interested in as far as being a part of a community, I encourage you to check out our website, togetherindigital.com. Our members have experienced, as all of us have, a tremendous past year. It's created a lot of stress, anxieties, and I think one of the most beautiful things about it is that we have been given the chance to help and support one another through these very difficult times digitally. So we're finally living up to that name of Together Digital. And today, as I was talking to somebody, I realized when they asked me what my favorite part of my job was, is absolutely having impact on other people's lives. But also, I have to say, the impact that it continues to have on mine. So again, check us out, learn about membership on our website. We have events like this, educational, all about life, all about business, all about digital, all week long. We have chapters across the country. So be sure to check us out. We also have an upcoming virtual summit that is happening all about power moves. This last year has been a tremendously difficult year for women, especially in the way of job loss and setbacks. So we want to try to help women move forward by providing some really amazing content, hosting some amazing speakers and panels on how to really make that next big power move. Whether that's from a life perspective or from a digital perspective, we have women who are going to talk about job seeking and imposter syndrome and talk about getting what you want through a negotiation as well. And we've got some amazing keynote speakers. Our founder, Elena, is going to be there speaking about her superpower, which is really how to leverage digital to make moves. She has done so not just within the advertising and marketing world, but also in the political, in the nonprofit world. So super excited for all of that. Again, check out the website for more information on that. Thanks to everybody again who's joining us. Hello in Denver. Hello in Chicago. Keep the comments coming in. We want this to feel like a conversation between us all. I know we can't see your faces, but we can see what you type. So let us know how you're feeling, where you're listening from. I'm going to bring Remy on here in just a minute, and I want you to make sure you ask her questions. She's amazing. Again, the ability of this group to share our learnings, our understanding, and our experience, especially on the topic today of vulnerability, is such a gift. So I definitely want you to take advantage of it. So again, thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to bring Remy in here. How are you, Remy?
Hello. Good, Amy. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm happy that you're here, and I'm happy it's Friday. I'm excited for our members, non-members, to get to know you and who you are and what you do before we really get into the good nitty-gritty about really how to show up with vulnerability in your career.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Remy Stiles. I am Chief Strategy Officer at Kepler. We are a digital marketing agency consultancy. I'm part of the founding team. We started the company almost 9 years ago now. There were 6 of us who started the company. We are really grounded and sort of born out of the ad technology space. So sort of very technical, data-driven, math-driven. And we have grown the company to now be a global organization of over 450 people across 7 offices. I really grew up in our client-facing team. So I ran our client solutions department about a year or 2 ago. and then moved into this chief strategy officer role where I'm working on strategic initiatives and projects for Kepler to sort of advance, our company initiatives and sort of broader strategy for the organization. So it's been quite a ride.
That's so true. It sounds like it. That's amazing. And I feel like we could probably have you back at some point too, to even just talk about more about ad tech and things like that. I mean, we've definitely had She-Rocks on that, and we love to get together and nerd out about just all of the amazing advances, because it's like every day digital is evolving and changing. And I think we're always in awe of it. But today we're really here to talk about vulnerability and the courage to have vulnerability in your career, because obviously, as I mentioned before, a lot of us have been through a lot of changes in this last year. Worry and anxiety is kind of paramount for a lot of us. In fact, I was reading recently that 1/3 of Americans have displayed clinical signs of anxiety, depression, or both since the coronavirus began. And obviously, that happens to leak into not just our personal lives, but our professional lives. But there's obviously something, as unnerving as it is, there's something that we can all do for ourselves and for others, and that's vulnerability. And I think that, Remy, that's where you have something to really offer to this group that's listening today, is that perspective, is how do you show up with more vulnerability, but then how do you also facilitate? You're leading an organization. How do you facilitate for more vulnerability? I know I'd be remiss not to mention Brene Brown when I'm talking about vulnerability, but speaking of digital and data, one of my favorite and most relevant quotes from her is that maybe stories are just data with soul. And I have not seen that one around, and I saw that one, I was like, I love it. And if you're not familiar with Brene Brown, y'all, just go Google her and look her up, start doing some reading, pick any one of her books. I don't feel like you could really go wrong. But Remy, for you, give us a little bit of backstory. What was happening for you in your life when COVID began, and how did the budget start, right, to make you appreciate vulnerability at work from a personal standpoint first, and then maybe we'll to like from a leadership standpoint?
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy to think back that now that was almost a year ago. This week was a year, since, at least for me, since we've been home. So there was a lot. So I had my second child in September of 2019, and I was back from maternity leave for about 5 weeks before COVID closed us down and everybody went to work from home. So I was just back from maternity leave. I was also just sort of entering into this chief strategy officer role. So it was like back to work, new role, trying to figure all of that out. And then all of a sudden, all of us working from home. I recently moved, but at the time we were living in Philadelphia. And so, we were in a city house, we had decent space for the city. We were in a city row home, but, my husband and I both working from home with both kids now at home because daycare closed. So there was a lot, I think, vulnerability became kind of a necessity. In a lot of ways, I feel like there was just no way around it, right? It was this whole, I had to be so open and honest about what was happening in my life. There was just no other way to do it. I had a 5-month-old at the time, and I was nursing, and I know that's not right for everybody, but for me, nursing worked, and it was working for us at the time. And so I was pumping on Zoom calls with video. I was nursing during our all hands meetings with my video off, and I just had to be really honest with everybody about our time and our schedule and what we needed, and there was a lot going on.
Yeah, sounds like it. I can imagine, and I feel like that's the thing about big major life events, is obviously you usually don't see them coming, and they never really come at the time you might expect. And so I'm sure that for you, again, kind of stepping into a very big role within the organization and, keeping people alive, those are very kind of difficult, complex things, especially under the stress and duress of, being concerned for your health and your safety of yourself and probably your coworkers and whatnot. So what is it about vulnerability in the workplace that makes you feel particularly passionate about it? And was this something that you really were advocating for and looking to find within previous organizations or even pre-COVID?
Yeah. I think just generally, I think it's important to be open, be honest, vulnerable is such an interesting word. I literally Googled it, this morning as I was thinking about prep for this. And the definition of vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed physically or emotionally. Just so negative. But it's, I was thinking about it and I was like, we all talk about vulnerability now as this positive thing. Like it's become this thing that progressive organizations foster and encourage. And it really now, I think in a lot of ways, at least in my world, and I recognize that that's coming from a progressive organization where we're able to have these open and vulnerable conversations. But, I do think it's viewed as a strength. And that's like, it's so interesting to me how like that negative has sort of turned into a positive, but it's important for so many reasons. And especially during the pandemic, without being able to, think about those things that typically, or maybe historically you would have been harmed or attacked for being a mom. What choice do you, and I'm saying that again from a place, I guess, of privilege. We're working for an organization where I can be working from home and I can be remote and I'm in a position of leadership. I'm personally very aware of that. Like I have the ability to be very vulnerable about my role as a mom in ways that maybe other people don't, because they don't have, they don't have the title of leadership to be able to say like, sorry, I just can't do that right now. That's really hard. And so, as a mom and as a leader, I think a lot about that. Like how does everybody need to be vulnerable about their in their personal life and recognizing that at all levels, people have to, that exists in their life, right? Those things that they maybe could be harmed or attacked for, not harm or attack them for it. And how do we create the space that makes people feel comfortable, bringing those things up, being honest about what's happening at home, being honest about, how they're really feeling, how they're really doing. I think as I've spent a lot of time this year talking to my team, and, we talk about saying like, how are you? Yeah. Not just like jump into the list of all the to-dos and all the things that we have to get done. I laughed at one of my direct reports one time because she joined the meeting and I said like, hey, good morning, how are you? And she went right into her to-do list and I said, stop. I asked how you were. I don't want to, we can talk about your to-do list next. But, I think those conversations are, while it might seem small, I think they're really important, and they, they create those human connections that we're all missing so much this year.
No, I agree. That's a great tip. I do think like I'm very much that way too. I'm very kind of task oriented. And even though I love people and I want to know how people are, I'm used to kind of back to back meeting, run, go. But you're right. There's something to be said about taking the time to really ask people how they are. And when they don't quite answer, like, no, but really I want to know. I think because we're so used to more transactional relationships with the people that we work with, that, everything that's happened in this last year has really forced us to kind of extend beyond that, to be more transformational in the way that we engage with one another, to really say, how are you doing? Because it's even so easy when somebody says, how are you, to say, fine. Like our automatic response is, you say how I am, I'm fine.
Right.
So I think your advice there is great. So maybe on your all's next meeting, really just ask how people are, like show genuine curiosity and care for them as an individual for like even a fraction of a second. And you're right, Remy. I think that goes such a long way. But I want to back up for a second, because you're talking about, being and going on leave and, being in a position of privilege and leadership, to be going into, motherhood and being in a place where you have a company that's progressive. But I also know that you were the first one, were you not, to go on leave? And so even as a leader, and having been a mom and a leader myself, like kind of talk a little bit like what that was like for you. Because even though you're in that place of privilege, there's still like certain challenges and narratives that you have to work against.
Yeah. So until very recently, I was the only woman on our executive team. I'm the only woman that's part of our founding team. And there actually was another woman who went on maternity leave just before me, who was more junior. And I really sympathize with, I think, a lot of what she had to go through, so that, we did it together. But Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in a couple of ways, especially thinking about the vulnerability. Like the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about I now have 2 children, but when my first leave, vulnerable is a really, I think, relevant word, because I felt so exposed and in a really interesting way that I frankly wasn't prepared for. So, I mean, especially being part of the founding team, there were 6 of us growing this company, and it was, my first, when I had my first son, I had 12 weeks off, and it was the first time that I had stepped away from work for that long.
Yeah.
And while it was wonderful, I was questioning why nobody needed me and what my role was. And was I really that important if I could be gone for 12 weeks and it was okay? And like the world kept turning and, we kept making money and we kept growing as a business. Like, what is my job? And, I know that's dramatic, but I think that's how a lot of women feel when they go on leave, and you sort of start to really question, and maybe that's part of imposter syndrome and all these other things that we deal with as women and people. But that was a really hard one for me. Like I actually sometimes got excited when my boss texted me with a random question, because I was like, okay, phew, like they still need me for something, right? I totally appreciated that they were giving me my time and space. It was this sort of interesting dynamic that I was struggling with. Like my career was so much of how I defined myself.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, like that whole part of me was gone, and I was now just, I was now this mom, and that was kind of my thing for those. Right. So that's sort of the first thing that I think, was just interesting. And I've tried to talk to other moms in the workplace about I wasn't prepared for it. And so I think it's an interesting dynamic to sort of think about as you enter motherhood. But the other thing is, I think being the first woman on the leadership team to have a baby, I felt so much responsibility. And I value that. And I value the role that I was able to play in sort of shaping some of the things that we've been able to do. But it also was a lot that I sort of put on my shoulders. I felt like, one, I had to educate people. Like I just felt like I had to be this mouthpiece for all, the future women of Kepler. We're a very young company. So I knew that there would sort of be this baby boom, of maybe a couple years after me. And I really wanted to do right by the women in creating the best space possible for sort of becoming a mom. And I mean, there were little things like when I first came back to work, we had a mother's room, which was good, but no one had really ever used it before. Right. So it was a conference room that was the mother's room, but anybody could book it as a conference room also. Like it just had a fridge and had some other, nice sort of mother room things. But, little things like it had a shade that you could pull down on the window, but there were little cracks on the side that and so, it was all well intended, but no one really, when you're pumping, you're topless. And so, a little crack on the side when you're in your workplace, that's not okay. You don't feel comfortable in there. And so, I quickly had to bring these things up and say, we got to fix this, these are little, but very important things. I also pretty quickly proposed updating our leave policy. So we actually extended both our primary and secondary caregiver leave, which I got to enjoy for my second child. But it's it made a really big difference. And I think, for me personally, when I had my second kid, I really noticed the difference in a couple extra weeks. Yeah. So, that was good. But I think, back to the education piece too, I think, that's a lot of the responsibility, I put on myself in being honest about what I needed, being honest about when I was pumping and somebody called me, I would answer the phone and say hey, I'm pumping. Sorry, there's background noise.
Is that worrying? It's not a white noise machine.
Blocking my calendar, when I needed the spaces. But being honest about it, not pretending I had something else to do. And I think, and again, those are the things as a responsibility I put on myself as a leader to say I'm in where I can sort of make this okay and make this normal and create, a culture that welcomes this for future moms. And that's what I tried to do.
That's so great, Remy. I think I was just jotting down that you made me think of a couple things. as a leader, like you are the example for vulnerability. Like it's really hard to ask others to show up, be present, be vulnerable with whatever it's going on in their life if you aren't kind of willing to do the same. So I think by saying like, yeah, this space isn't working or the time is blocked off, so I need to be able to pump it, then I'm happy to take calls. It doesn't matter to me like whether or not you're a mom or if you ever plan on becoming a mom. I think that part of it isn't super relevant because I think it can translate into so many other aspects of your life that you might need to have or show vulnerability, whether that's taking care of an aging parent, going through family planning, or going through, just mental health issues and trying to navigate that. Like protect that time and space like you would as if you were caring for a child. And I think there's something to working and becoming a mom that I know, and I relate so much to what you're saying. I think it was because of that, like I gained perspective and I started to look around me more and say, gosh, I need this space to be vulnerable. And not just because I'm a mom, but like in so many other ways in my life,
Totally.
how can I start to help other people be vulnerable or have the flexibility and the space to kind of get through what they need to get through so they don't feel like they're worried about being harmed or hurt or attacked. Because again, when people show up kind of in that like red zone of fear, when things are bad outside of work, it's really hard to get the best out of them. So I think what you're doing is amazing. And everything you're speaking to, at least from my personal experience, feels very similar. And I know that, motherhood's a common kind of ignition for that thing, but I think also understand, we know that not every woman is going out there and wanting to have children, but certain things about kind of that experience that you should be able to learn from and gain from and feel empowered to show vulnerability and to create open space for others to be vulnerable. So on that note, within your organization, you've been doing monthly meetups and you started those 2 years ago, but those were in person. And then you had to kind of shift into this remoteness. So let's talk about that a little bit. How are you facilitating, now that you're outside of that physical space, how are you facilitating vulnerability for your team and your coworkers? And how has that been eye-opening for you?
Yeah. There's so much to say. So the meetups are specifically around the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we started it kind of as a team 2 years ago. That was a group of people that was, we were very interested in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within our organization. And, we were trying to define what that meant. And I mean, obviously that is the topic of the year, and everybody can always be doing more against those initiatives. And, 2 years ago, there was maybe, 10 to 20 of us that would get together monthly and we would have conversations around any relevant topic, whether like in March, it would be International Women's Day or, whatever it might be. And those meetups have grown drastically, especially this year. And really, I think it's been a defining part of our organization now and who we are and how we think and how we are vulnerable in so many ways. So basically, there's a topic every month. We send out either articles or TED Talks or YouTube videos or whatever it is, sort of on, educating on that topic. So everyone's sort of responsible for doing a bit of self-education before. Right. And then we get together for an hour and we talk about it and we use, we go into breakout rooms and we have discussions and we come back together and we talk about it. But it is, I think it is the best way that we've been able to facilitate vulnerability at work, because it has created this incredibly safe space where everybody really shows up with all of their thoughts and opinions and experiences and challenges and hurt. And, we laugh, we cry, we tell stories. And it is, my CEO recently referred to it as like the village square. It's just like, it's the place everybody comes together. And we've all learned so much, throughout, all of the meetups that we've had, but it has been, I think, so eye-opening to me around so many topics that I maybe thought I was educated on, but then when you actually hear people talk about it from personal experiences that you haven't lived, I wasn't, and we've all, but it's also created that space to say that's okay. And like, let's just educate ourselves now and let's not beat ourselves up for not knowing every detail, about someone's experience or how you define yourself. And so it's been a really interesting way for us, I think, to facilitate vulnerability at work, but also, sort of make everyone feel heard and create that culture.
That's really awesome. How many people do you have at the company?
Our full team, we're a little over 450 now.
Oh, wow, that's huge. And then was this kind of like early, like get in a little bit of education and then come together and talk about it? Was that like your format and your approach pre-COVID, or was this kind of how you pivoted post-COVID?
It was our format pre-COVID, but COVID has it has changed it, I think, for the better. It's one of the examples of a thing or a tradition or, that we had pre-COVID that I think in a lot of ways has actually worked better during, like, it's one of the things that translated well to work from home, because one, we got a lot more participation because I think it made it feel more accessible. Something about everybody just being a box on Zoom, I think, made more people feel comfortable as opposed to sort of walking in a conference room and, having to decide whether to attend or I don't know. It's something about it made it feel more accessible. It also, I think everybody just was so craving the connection and humanity and like being able, like everyone's going through so much this year. Everybody needed a place to come and talk about it and be able to, share and commiserate and educate, like all of those things, I think just became really, really important. And so it's sort of evolved a lot during COVID, but I think, for the better.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. I know that's been a challenge for us as an organization, being member-based, community-driven. Even though we're together digital, like it took us a minute to figure out how to make sure that we could still have impact on each other's lives. And I think education is a key part, but then like you said, you're creating space for vulnerability, and that kind of takes like some sort of regular drumbeat. So we have these things called virtual peer circles where people can come together on a regular basis. We have one that's like an open topic one every Wednesday that one of our amazing members here out of Cincinnati, Tony Plum, helps to manage. And it's just anything's on the table. Ask for what you need without any sense of guilt or shame. And then people are there to give without any sense of judgment, and it's all in support. So it could be anything from a workplace issue, an interpersonal issue, a relationship issue, like nothing's really off the table. And I think to know that you have that kind of space really, really helps you, feel seen and feel heard. And that's what people really want. Because like you said, they're hungering for that connection. And I know a lot of people are like, Zoom fatigue, I'm so tired, I can't. But as much as I agree with that, and I can't wait for us to be able to get together in person, I think, your group sounds like a really great case in point. And I think our group's been a really good case in point of the fact that you really can have transformational relationships with people, even while virtual. And I think that that's a really cool and interesting thing. So I think, I'm curious, like, do you all plan to sort of kind of keep some aspects of this sort of evolution going?
I think so. I mean, one, we've become a bigger organization in the past year. We've actually experienced pretty tremendous growth over the past couple of months, and we've grown a lot. So, people are all over. We have 7 offices around the globe now. So to some degree we have to, right? I think we've created a bigger, more global organization. And so the way, a lot of the ways that we have lived this year will remain, just because that's now how the world's going to work. And, I'm sure, as with a lot of companies, like people are considering more remote policies and all of those types of things. But I think it's also, for in terrible ways, and then for the better, the world has changed in the past year. I mean, I think about our meetup, our DEIT meetup last June, in the wake of George Floyd's murder. Like that was the biggest meeting we had ever had to date, because everybody, there were so many emotions and feelings, and we needed a space to talk about it and to cry and to listen and to educate ourselves. And that was June, but like the conversation's not over. And there's so many others that are, so relevant to people, and that we need to be talking about, regularly. So I think, the necessity for that space is going to continue. And I think like the participation from the organization, and the value that we find in that space is just so important.
Yeah, that is wonderful because I've been a part of several organizations where they have multitude of offices and each of them have kind of like their own vibe, their own culture. And it's like you might not even know those people. I can imagine that it's kind of in a weird way, despite you all being separate, has brought you closer. And I think that's really awesome.
Totally. Yeah. And you meet people that you otherwise wouldn't have. We actually had one this morning that I joined. And, you know, we did breakout rooms and I was in a breakout room with 3 other people that like I don't work with on a regular basis. They're in other offices. They're not in my sort of day-to-day working. And it's great. I mean, obviously the topics are great and what we learn from each other, but even just having the opportunity to meet other people and get to know them a little bit because it is such a personal experience. Like we're not talking about work at all. And so you actually get to, get a glimpse inside people's lives a bit and, hear like what they've gone through and how they grew up and what, their backgrounds are.
Yeah, same. I feel very much the same because we have about 20 different cities across the country that had chapters and they've done such a great job of still connecting and staying connected to one another, but like everybody's network and everybody's knowledge of one another across the board has really sort of grown. And like you said, exactly that. Like so many people I've met this year that if things would have been maybe as we thought they would have been, I never would have had the chance to meet. So that's awesome.
Right.
Sounds like at Kepler from the get-go, it's been a part of your DNA and the organization to kind of embrace this sense of whole self and bringing your whole self to work concept. So I want to have you elaborate on that a little bit from like maybe, from the kind of a leadership employer standpoint, and then maybe from a little bit of an employee standpoint for those who maybe are feeling a little trepidatious about what that means and what that can look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something I don't think we would have said that 9 years ago, right? But like we always lived that in, being open and honest about sort of who we are. But it's been a journey for us too. And I think that's a lot of where our DEI team meetup have been really valuable because, there were 6 of us who started the company and you'd only get so much experience from 6 people, right? As you grow as an organization, there is just then more diversity and more, things that people have gone through and ways that we need to understand each other. And that's one of the places that I think these meetups have been, for me personally, one of the most valuable ways, because I feel like I am able to better understand people in terms of how they show up at work and yes, like creating a space where they're comfortable doing that, but it translates into all the day-to-day stuff now because you understand people in different ways, which enables you to ask them questions or facilitate conversations in a way that maybe you wouldn't have. I think about, you mentioned mental health before. We had a mental health, that was one of our topics of the month a couple of months ago. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me in that space. We had a woman join from an office who she had never joined a DEI team meetup before. She had never come to our meetings, and she came and openly talked about her struggle with bipolar disorder, and how she struggled with it for 13 years and like everything that she went through. Never would have known that. Not that I view her differently now, but it's like I can better make sure she has the space that she needs, that when, she explains like when she's having a flare up, she just needs space for a little while. And like, I've seen it and she's now more comfortable asking for that space because she made this like public statement to so many people in the company about it. I was literally crying in that meeting because it was so emotional, but I also was so happy that she felt comfortable, saying that and bringing her whole self to work and making sure people knew what she was dealing with and the sort of like the way that she needed, support from Kepler. And so, I think it's an example of like how we've figured out how to facilitate that culture. Because I think it's really hard. Like you can say all day long, like bring herself to work, but you have to live it and breathe it and show. I mean, as you said, like, in the example of me being a mom at work, like the vulnerability has to come. You have to see other people being vulnerable and see other people setting that example in order for others to feel comfortable doing so. And, it isn't the easiest thing to do. So anyway, I think that's, how we've figured out how to facilitate it. And we as leaders try to, one, join those meetings, but then also like pull those through to other meetings that we are leading. Even our, we have a weekly all hands meeting that our CEO usually leads, and like he'll be very open and honest about like how he's feeling that week and what's going on in his house, and his daughter will walk in the background. Like you just have to create that space where it's like, I'm a human, I'm not just a robot at work.
Right. Well, because that's the difference between like that fear and liberation and leveraging your vulnerability, is that if you're afraid to step forward and say something, again, because being vulnerable, like you shared the definition, is that fear of being harmed or attacked. But the good side, the flip side of vulnerability is that once it's out there, it, like you said, it not just gave her the voice and the opportunity to be able to ask for what she needs now more freely. Now you can acknowledge that space more easily, more freely. And then I'm sure that she empowered several of her coworkers by even that up. Anytime somebody gets vulnerable with our groups, I'm always so in awe and inspired by their bravery, because it opens the door for other people to be vulnerable. And it just builds this collective strength. Yeah, it's like, as you were talking to, I was reminded of the Fred Rogers quote. Mr. Rogers is that once you hear somebody's story, you can't help but fall in love with them. I think the best kind of people in the world, the kind of people that you want to be working with and working for, when they do get to really know you as you and still love you and appreciate you for that, even at work. Like you are in a good place,
Yeah, totally. And actually, out of that meeting, I meant to say, so the mental health month conversation, everybody was openly talking about going to therapy, of which, I think like so many people have started going to therapy. I never went to therapy. I just started going to therapy a couple months ago because I need an outlet now. And, that is so important. But anyway, so in the monthly meetup, everybody was talking about going to therapy, and we made it just this normal thing. And somebody said, I forget, somebody on the team said, why do we all put hold on our calendar and not say like Remy's at therapy?
Right.
And everybody in the meeting said like, everybody go into your calendar right now and
that's so cool.
Your calendar hold of therapy for like at therapy.
Right.
Everybody did it. We said, of course you don't have to if you're not comfortable doing it. But like I see people's calendars now, and I'm checking people's times for meetings, and it says like, so-and-so at therapy, so-and-so at therapy. And I think it was this simple moment in a meeting that changed dozens of people's calendars.
That's a great example.
Normal, and nobody pretends that, they're doing anything else. And, for me, I was actually looking for a therapist at the time. So we have a Slack channel for this team too. And, I went into the channel and I said, I'm looking for a therapist. Does anybody have recommendations? Like, I know there's all these virtual platforms now, and I got a whole bunch of responses, and we went back and forth about it. But it's so nice to normalize those conversations, right? Have that space. And it's, for me, yes, I have, plenty of friends and family that I can talk to, but I have 450 people at my company that I can get, advice and shared experience from. So it's become, this group for me that I'm like reliant on for advice and tips. And
I feel that same way. I know our members would be, like I was saying earlier, we do like the ask and the gives a lot. And asks, it's kind of anything, like whatever it is that you need. And it is great to know that you've got a safe place and resource to kind of put that out there to say, hey, this is what's needed. And I love you all normalizing therapy. I think mental health is just as important as our physical health. And when our physical health is kind of compromised or in question because of something, like a pandemic, it can take a massive toll on our mental health. So I love you all are putting that on their calendars and being so transparent about it. Like I said, it enables the bravery of others. We had a few questions come in, which is awesome. So please keep them coming. We'll have time for everybody to ask questions that wants to ask questions. Julie was wanting to ask, how has vulnerability helped in retaining your members?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's something we think about a lot, and we've actually started doing more trainings for leaders on this topic, because I think in a lot of ways, that's where it's really important. The things I'm talking about, that we've been able to do sort of like company-wide and culture-wide are important, but really what matters is your day-to-day interactions, right? And so if your direct leader isn't, open and having these conversations with you, like kind of the rest of it doesn't even matter, because that's what you're like living on a day-to-day basis. And so, we've been really doing trainings with our leaders and our new leaders, especially around, I mean, of course, unconscious bias training, and things like that, which lots of organizations are talking about, but also, I think just like why these things are so important, and encouraging it to not just be a Kepler-wide culture thing, but like really instilling it in people's day-to-day, and creating that like space between a manager and a direct report to be honest about what people need. I was in one of these meetups this morning, and we were talking about neurodiversity, which I understand can be a controversial term within the community, but with things like ADHD and things like that, and people are talking about like how different learning styles, you have to be able to have a conversation with your leader about that and say like, I learn in a different way. Here's the support that I need from you in order to be able to be my best self at work. And so I think in those ways, I can't exactly quantify to say it's helped retain team members, but I think it has in the way that people, we do a happiness pulse survey every month where we just send out a couple questions to just gauge sort of like the sentiment of the organization. And, that helps us. And I think like happiness is tied to a lot of these things, right? If you feel heard and you feel listened to and you feel seen, you feel happier.
That's great. I love that. I think some sort of sentiment analysis on a regular basis is really, really smart, because it's not even about like, if they have like life satisfaction, there's probably a good likelihood that they have some sense of job satisfaction because they feel like they can balance between the two. So even without like the hardcore data, I can only imagine that anybody that's listening to this call that's ever worked in an organization that doesn't facilitate for or have a space for vulnerability would be like, that I want to work there if they do. And, or if I was, I'd probably never leave, because I just know based on the ins and outs of life, like the place that I work with would be supportive of whatever journey I was on. I think so. Yeah. I can't imagine that it wouldn't help. That's awesome. We did have one more question come in from Colleen, and I'm sure some of our listeners are feeling this as well too. If they're in that kind of environment, like I was alluding to, where it doesn't feel like you quite know the person or quite know the culture, especially if you're a lot of people are starting their jobs completely virtual right now. So with a new manager, how can you tell how much to be vulnerable?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And, as I sort of just alluded to, it's a lot on the manager, right? I mean, I think, and that's where organizations need to train their leaders to encourage these conversations, because it's much easier to come from your manager than to come from you. But, as a leader, I will say that, I can think of a couple examples of people on my team where like I knew they were going through something, but you're sort of not sure if they want to talk about it. You don't know how much to ask. You don't want to bring it up all the time, which sort of goes back to my, original like, how are you questions. And so I think if I guess my advice would be if your leader's giving you an opening on like, how are you, like be honest, right? And so, as long as you feel like you're in an organization where those things are valued and vulnerability is valued. I mean, unfortunately, there are still a lot of very old school organizations where this is very challenging, and I fully recognize that, unfortunately. But like take the space, I guess, if you feel like you can, or, don't just say, I need the day off, like tell somebody why you need the day off, or, the learning example. Like, I think there's some easy ones, like learning, I think is learning styles or support that you need at work is an easier conversation to have, because that's, you can't do your job well. You can't be you can't be a productive employee if you're not getting the support you need. Right. And so if you have to have a vulnerable conversation with your direct leader to say, this isn't my style, I don't learn well this way, or I don't respond to feedback that way. Like, there are certain ways that people hear things differently. Like I know if I've received feedback certain ways, like I just shut down, because it just makes me feel so beat up that it doesn't work for me. It doesn't motivate me to be better. It actually just motivates me to like totally shut down. And so you have to be honest about those things, because otherwise like you're not going to be your best self, and that doesn't help your company. So I think, even thinking through it in those lenses sometimes can help open those conversations to feel a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's really smart. That makes a lot of sense. Hopefully that's helpful, Colleen. I think the other two things that I thought of as you were talking, I love that, taking the opportunity to be there and to be vulnerable. I would also throw on top of that, like relevancy is key and important. So like, I know in the past, having led several teams, like sometimes just getting to know a little bit of something about someone, if I'm having to come to them and say, hey, I've noticed this has become something of an issue. Is there anything that we need to talk about it? Or if I know that they know it's an issue, if I'm like not the manager and I'm the one reporting to somebody, I usually kind of come forward with that little tidbit of, hey, this didn't happen because of, and it's an excuse, just understand this is a situation that I'm dealing with. I think relevancy is also really important. And then, you know, as you're getting to know your manager, I mean, I'm just always a fan of approaching everything from a mindset of curiosity, because it's never feels confrontational when somebody just kind of comes asking questions. And so you could ask, totally. Are you a fan of Brene Brown? Or how do you feel about vulnerability at work? Like, just ask the questions and then see if they get a read on them and know whether or not this is something that, like you said, Remy, that they have a capacity for, an understanding for, an appreciation for, and hopefully some training on too. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's great that you all train your managers, because again, it's something's weird, you know, and hard. Like, I've been there where it's like, I am talking to an employee and then all of a sudden they like fall apart. And I'm like, what's happening? What? And I'm not like equipped to handle it because it's like not even work related. And that's fine. Yeah. Like, I feel like I'm friendly enough with people. Usually I can just kind of throw myself into like the friend mode, even if I'm the boss. But I know that's not for everybody. So I think that that the fact that you all are doing that is tremendous. So kudos to you guys. Love
Thank you. I mean, I will also say, like, I don't want to say we're perfect, right? Like, we have so much room to grow. And a lot of it came from, some of the trainings that we're doing now came from being really self-aware around some feedback we got where it wasn't great, right? And there were instances where people didn't feel like they were, you know, understood by their leader or supported in the right way or given the right opportunity, you know, to adjust for their learning style. And so those things forced us, but also like opened our eyes to like, okay, here's a thing. How are we going to go? How are we going to go, you know, improve and adjust for it? So I think that's part of it too, right? Like, if your organization's not there, that doesn't mean you can't be there. Like, we've made a lot of progress in the past couple of years around some of these things.
Well, I think one other thing you just pointed out too is just like providing it in a form of feedback. Do you know what I mean? Like, even when you walk into that meeting room and you're like, oh, before I wasn't a mom sitting in this physical space as a person pumping topless, but now that I am, I'm like, yeah, no, this doesn't work. But because you had that perspective, you were able to provide that feedback. So granted, while you might not be topless in a room trying to pump, you have some perspective based on whatever it is that you're going through, that then you can look at it and say, hey, I've noticed we've been doing this. And I really think as somebody that is experiencing this, it would be smart if we kind of did this. And so like providing feedback and a solution, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I like that. Yeah. Awesome. We have another question in, so keep them coming. We've got as much as 10 minutes left. Once the questions stop, then we will start to roll out. But I want you all, like I said, we leave time for questions for a reason. Ramona wants to know, what kind of resources or tools do you have in place, recommended or used, to ensure that training provides a safe place for vulnerability to happen, i.e. nonviolent communication, et cetera?
So it's a training question. Yeah, that's a good one. So this is an area like I just said, we've sort of more recently, I think, been improving on, and frankly, like, had to really continue thinking about through COVID, because leading via Zoom and Slack was a whole new world for people. And everybody had to figure out, you know, what additional sort of training and whatnot we need. So we have a combination of, I think, a bunch of things. We have internal trainings that we do around, you know, some of these topics. And part of them, again, is just like almost, you know, cultural norm training of just like, here's how would we like to operate, and how we want people to feel at work. We also have brought in outside speakers. I think that's really important when you're, you know, we can't claim to be the expert on all of these topics, and there are people who are, and, you know, can come into an organization and do really good trainings at all different levels. We've started something, we're just sort of in the process of rolling it out, called milestone training, where we're not just doing blanket leadership training, but we're doing training for like specific roles. So like the first time you're promoted into a role where you're now having people report to you, like we're doing a milestone training for those people, like just getting promoted into that role versus then getting promoted into the next role like that. That group gets their whole separate leadership training because there's different things you need to learn along the way, right? And so I think that's important, like sort of catering to those different touch points as for organizations as you grow. We also have a bunch of resources like LinkedIn Learning even is a really good one. We have subscriptions to that. I don't know, if everybody has access to that, but there's thousands and thousands of training courses on every topic, but a lot around sort of the topics that we're talking about here too. There's a lot of good resources out there. I think those are the big ones. I don't know if I'm answering that question for a while.
But continued learning opportunities. There are a lot of resources out there, and I agree with you. It's like we can't know everything, and having outside perspectives coming in are great. And then also just facilitating and structuring training that's more iterative. I think it seems so like, oh, well, why wouldn't you do that? But people, they don't, and like to complete that training before you move into the next role instead of sort of learning on the job with people's lives and careers during such a critical time. Like I get that helps the employees and it helps those managers as well. So thank you, Ramona. That was a great question. Go ahead. Are you going to add something else?
No, I was just agreeing. Yes.
That is awesome. And then I would say too, for those of you who don't feel like you have those resources, don't be afraid to ask for them. If you're kind of stuck in that spot where you're managing a team and you feel like you're a little bit out of like the ability to show up for them in the way that you want, I don't think there's anything wrong with you getting vulnerable and looking to your manager to say, I could use some more tools and resources on how to handle and manage these things for my coworkers, because again, like you said, it comes full circle. It helps with retention. It helps with the overall happiness of the group. It also helps everybody sort of be on the same page and succeed. And I think that's really, really cool. Yes. And Colleen said that was very helpful. So thank you.
Thanks, Colleen.
Awesome. Well, that's so cool. I don't know if anybody else has any questions, but I want all of you to, again, think about some ways over the weekend in which you can show up and show some more vulnerability at work, to whatever degree that you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Because again, the thing is that when we step out of that comfort zone, that's when we see the most growth. And that's also when we empower and enable other people to feel encouraged to be vulnerable. So Remy, for all the things that you're doing at Kepler, that's awesome. Thank you for being such a great leader and example of, the right way to kind of continuously learn and grow and show up and be vulnerable. I think it's really, really awesome what you're all doing there.
The one last thing I'll say too, you're thanking me, which I certainly cannot take credit for all of this. And I will, say that a lot of the progress that we've made on these topics has been directly from employees on our team. Like I can think of a handful of people that have really pushed us on topics and frankly pushed leadership outside of their comfort zone. Like it took conversations to get to this point, and especially this past year. Our DEI group that started 2 years ago was a guy on my team in Philly who was really passionate about these topics and wanted to talk about it. And, he brought the idea to a couple of people in leadership and we said like, yeah, of course we love that. Let's go do it. But everybody should feel empowered to you have the opportunity to be the one, even if you're not in leadership. If you're hopefully at a company that values these types of conversations, don't feel like you don't have the power to start that, because I think it can definitely be employee driven. I think, yes, open-minded leadership helps, but, and frankly, like, as somebody in the leadership role, we're thrilled when employees are bringing these topics and ideas because the list is so long of all the things that we want to do. And, it's great when we have employees sort of sitting in the driver's seat for some of these initiatives as well. So these are really important conversations that we always want to keep pushing forward, but everybody has power to do it.
Oh, you're right. Such a good note to end on. I agree. So hopefully you all feel empowered to go out and be more courageous and be vulnerable at work. Remy, thank you again for your time and all of your thoughts and ideas and wisdom. I think it was really, really helpful. I mean, I think we talk about this topic a lot, but even I'm walking away feeling like I learned some new things. So I hope all of you did too. For those of you who are still with us and listening, be sure to subscribe to YouTube if you want to make sure that you never miss a She Rocks, or you can always go back and watch the ones that you do miss. Also, again, check out our website if you aren't a member, and then share us on LinkedIn. Let us know what you learned from today, what you're going to take away from today. Share some of that power and that wisdom that Remy just shared with you and put it out into the universe. Help somebody else out as well. Until then, we shall see you all next Friday. Next Friday is going to be a great conversation. As per usual, these are always so much fun and so insightful. We're going to be talking about overwhelmed and over it. We're talking with a woman who really understands how to simplify things within your life to help reduce the amount of stress that you're experiencing. So we've had some very kind of a high level, more of that emotional mental health, the sort of aspect, as we're coming on a year of this whole COVID situation and everything else. It's like, we know that these are important topics to all of you, but we're always open to feedback and ideas for additional topics, for additional guests. But until then, we'll see you all next week. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
See me.
Yep. Have a good weekend, everybody.